Today I want to talk about my exploration of different art styles to work so I can use them and not use them but learn them for future game projects. I'm specifically looking into voxel art, which I've done in the last weeks and months, even with my own voxel editor. And right now I'm looking a little bit more into vector art. I also want to talk a little bit about the differences of voxel art and vector art and why I'm looking at them and where I see issues that I have with both of them. And the voxel, both of these art styles are I find them very pure. They're very unified in their workflows. Both art styles use the same tools and techniques for creating shapes and for creating colors. In voxel art, it's very much like pixel art, just in 3D. You place, not necessarily voxel per voxel, but you fill regions and shapes of color in a 3D grid. And with these shapes, you create the shape, but you also create the details in the colors. So there's not a difference between creating a shape and creating the detailed colors for a specific 3D model, like you would have it with normal 3D modeling. You would make the mesh and then you would have to texture it most of the time. You could use with that some kind of color palettes and do some simple UV unwrapping just for some colors, or even with some gradients, you could do that. But even with that, there's a different workflow with creating the mesh and manipulating the vertices if you're sculpting or hard surface modeling or even subsurface modeling. Doesn't really change a thing. You have one tool set for creating the mesh and you have another tool set from UV unwrapping and texture painting to create the colors for a mesh. These would be two different kind of workflows and two different tool sets that one have to learn to make the shape and to make the color details. With vector art, it's very much the same. With vector art, it's very much like modeling in 3D, just in 2D and a little bit simpler. You just define the shapes and then you don't really have a way to be a little bit more detailed with the colors. You also do that via shapes or add some patterns and just set some settings on specific shapes or strokes. So there's not a lot of, there's no UV unwrapping, no texture painting in vector art, and the details that you would do for colors and the shapes to make the general shape of whatever graphic model asset, whatever you do, are the same. So that's what I like about both of these art styles, or not art styles, but like kind of art techniques, vector art and voxel art. They are unified in the tool sets for shapes and for color details, which I, as a more as a programmer, I kind of really like to have reduced and limited and unified workflows when it comes to shaping and colorization. They of course create limitations, but I'm very hesitant and I do not like the idea of learning 3D modeling with some kind of texture painting, because that adds a lot of just tool sets and steps in the workflow to create assets for a game. And I want to have the least amount of different skills required in the different workflows, because well, in normal, like if I would learn 3D modeling with like Blender, I would have to learn the modeling. I would have to learn the UV unwrapping. I would have to learn some kind of texture painting if that is more pixel art or hand painted or whatever kind of style. I would need 2D art as well. I would need some rigging and potentially some texture, some weight painting, which that I will need for voxel art and for vector art as well. Voxel art and vector art can work a lot better with some kind of cutout animation, so I wouldn't need parts of the model that bend, so weight painting could be removed from that workflow, and also the rigging would be a little bit easier potentially with that. and well, animation on both with some skeleton are the same. So it's very much mostly the difference to this workflows in difficulty. If I need UV unwrapping, if I need an additional texture painting where I'm doing 3D art potentially, and then needing to have 2D texture skills as well. It's just a lot of skills and a lot of workflows that have to come together and that I would have to learn to make good art assets for a game. And I want to limit the things that I need to learn, at least early on. So I just think that is an easier way to get to better results, at least quicker. They, of course, create limitations. And for voxel art, my issue with voxel art mostly come from, first, potentially just the, what is it called? I forgot the name or the word. When you make any kind of voxel art, you're very quickly connected and related to like Minecraft and these very like well-known voxel art games, which are, I mean, not necessarily pure voxel art, and Minecraft only uses, I would say, voxel techniques and not really voxel art. But well, it's known for that, and it's a blocky game, and I think voxel art just immediately, from my experience, connects any kind of game or whatever you do through just social media algorithms just very quickly to a more younger audience and more to children. So it could be more difficult to market any kind of voxel art game where I would be more grounded, more realistic, a little bit more, yeah, just not very a younger audience. I would have a lot more of a mature audience. That's at least what I would potentially aim for. And so there would be a mismatch potentially of like the games that I would do with like voxel art and the audience that I potentially would attract with that. There doesn't have to be, but there's just a little bit of an inherent mismatch where I would just have to deal with that kind of audience, which is potentially an issue. And for a game, it is very much important that the look, if you see like just an image, like just 5 seconds of a gameplay video, something like that, that you as the audience can just see is this something for me or not. And voxel art can be off-putting for a lot of people and can be, again, through social media algorithms, mistargeted at the wrong audience easily, because they're just very connected to Minecraft. And yeah, that's an issue to deal with when making something with voxel art, I think. The other bigger issue that I have more so on the limitation side is actually how voxel limits first the shape. It's very difficult to make more organic shapes, and it can be very difficult when it comes to the scaling. Voxel art, very much like pixel art, you have fixed scale of detail. Like in my last project, working mostly with like a voxel size of like 2 centimeters per voxel, which is quite a lot of voxels, which means at some points I don't have enough detail, even with like 2 centimeters per voxel, to make really small things and really small details. So it's difficult for me as a beginner who's not really good with like art and with like not really having a very intuitive experience and understanding of shapes and how to make something look so it's very easable in its silhouette and its form and in its shape. So their voxel art is quite limiting because, well, first everything is boxy, and also because of the scaling, I have an issue where if I want to do details that are smaller than what the voxel size allows, that becomes very difficult. I either would have to have different scaling in the objects like Minecraft does, where it has a uniform size of details, or like of the size of voxels, and like just details with like Minecraft has 16 by 16 pixels per meter on like its blocks, but also it uses that most of the time by items, and it tries to stay consistent with that. And that's also very much the same in voxel art, how it looks the best most of the time, like mixing different voxel sizes can be difficult to make it look good. And from that, you have the issue that you either have to have unrealistically scaled items, where some smaller items have to be bigger to just display them well, or you just have weird looking small objects. And if you add more tiers and you make the voxels smaller, then you have the issue that when you go bigger and you make something bigger, you have to add a lot of details there or have them mismatched. So there's just, with voxel art, you just have the issue that you need to pick the right scale of detail, and most of the things that you have in your game ideally are in that scale of detail. And doing that at the beginning of like making a game without experience, I think can be quite difficult. It's something that I'm currently a lot more aware of. Okay, there are scaling issues and there are also shape issues because of the block. It's quite limiting in these factors. And I'm not really necessarily a big fan actually of these limitations. I do quite enjoy voxel art of an aesthetic. But then another issue with voxel art is voxel art from an aesthetic, it can be quite difficult, especially I think for a beginner, it might be even more difficult with something voxel art. I think it's the same with pixel art, to make your own unique art style, because a lot of times the big thing that defines a voxel art or a pixel art style is actually the scaling of like the size of the voxel or the pixel. Like a 8x8 pixel art looks most of the time the same. It's very difficult to make the same object with 8x8 pixels, for example, in very different ways or in very different styles. I mean, of course you can, but all 8x8 pixel art or 16x16 look very similar just because of the limitation of the details that you can put in. You just don't have as much variety with these kind of limitations to be more unique in your art style. And I think that's very much the same with voxel art, where it can be very difficult to make a voxel art style that's a little more unique and a little more original because of the limitations and because we often work with very small scalings, so just quite big voxels. And so these are the three issues that I have with voxel art. I'm kind of not to say that I won't stick with it, but I want to explore a bit else and see if there are other opportunities that I might prefer or that might even be easier to do and give me better results. So that's why I'm currently looking into vector art. With vector art, well, one of my big issues is that I prefer 3D games. I'm more into 3D games. But I also think, well, 2D games, they're simpler. And if I want to make games and if I want to, especially I'm looking more so into potentially a little bit bigger games, I have to simplify things and I just have to make compromises, and making a simpler game in 2D might be a compromise that I have to make, even if I prefer working in 3D. Or not that I prefer to work in 3D, I prefer 3D games. I prefer the freedom of having a camera that I can just move and play around with. I like the freedom of using 3D lighting systems from just rendering engines and techniques from that to bump up visual art styles. And that's not as easy in 2D. Of course, there's the other side that actually the lighting system in Godot is a little bit tricky to use, and you have to be, I think, at this point well known, or you have to know yourself around with like the lighting tools and the lighting system and the materials and all of that stuff in 3D in Godot to make it really good. Like by default, I think lights and also shadows in Godot are not really the best. Like Godot can't keep up to Unity on Unreal on the ease of use, but just by default having a nice look and having it look with some kind of quality. Godot needs tweaking and needs some customization on the lighting tools, on the settings and on the scenes, on the assets to make 3D stuff look good. So that's one of the reasons why because that's kind of one of the big features for me doing in 3D, having the freedom of a camera that I can play with around and like perspectives, which I would still have. But the lighting system and the shadow system in Godot is at this point not really that ease of use for like someone who's not really well known, or I don't have that much experience with using lighting systems and tweaking that to like design the light style and the atmosphere that I want and the visual style of it. And so Godot might make that even a little more difficult for me when I work in 3D and just making something a lot simple in 2D. So I'm looking more on the 2D side, on the 2D side, and Vector Art is a good tool for that, I think. My only concern, other than, well, I don't necessarily prefer 2D games, is something that I'm very hesitant with 2D games is just, well, I need to do perspective on my own, and that's on its own is not necessarily the issue. The issue is where especially characters and rotating them, like having a top-down game and not wanting just one. You can mirror left and right very easily in 2D, so you can just use one animation for the right side and flip it to the left. But if I want to have like a character going down and up, I need to recreate the whole sprites and the whole animations, and that's something in 2D that I find that make me just very hesitant of doing anything in 2D. Having to make a character or any kind of asset on any kind of animation, having to redo it completely for any kind of direction that it would face in 2D is just something that I just find it puts me off a lot. Like it makes me very hesitant to commit to a 2D art style, that part. At this point, I do not really know how that actually compares in practice. Like, is 2D art that much easier compared to like making a 3D character, for example, and like rigging them and then only have to do any animation once and I'm just done and I can use it however I want? Compared to in 2D, I have to redo the whole sprites and the whole character and the whole animations for any kind of angle, and I would have to redo all animations for any kind of rotations of the character that I would put in a game. Most of the time, even with a simple style where you have like a top-down game, you would make a character go at least, I don't know, to the bottom right and to the top right. So like 55-degree angles, so you would at least need 2. You could have also 3, 1 down, 1 right, 1 up. You could do more, but if I don't just want like a character that's not rotating at all, depending on how it moves, which I potentially would find ways to do that as well, but I'm not sure if I would actually be able, if that would fit in games that I would make, we will see. But even if I just do 2 directions, I would have to make all animations twice and all sprites twice, and have to do a forward and or like a front and a back side of all characters. If I would like to do any kind of like armor, like clothing sets, I would have to do all of them also twice. Again, I don't have enough experience to really tell in practice if 2D art is that much easier, especially with vector art, that still takes less time than creating the assets in 3D and with Voxel Art or any kind of other. But it might still just be quicker and give with that more practice actually. So there might still be an upside on that, but at least from right now, from without actually having a comparison of what is actually in practice quicker, I feel like very hesitant of needing to redo all assets for different directions. But other than that, I don't really see any other downsides. So I have to say in Voxel Art right now, there are just downsides that stay forever, like the scaling and the shape issue. The shape issue, of course, gets better with experience, being able to make more organic and easier and quicker shapes with Voxel Art. Of course, will get a little bit quicker, but it will always stay. There will always be some kind of friction in that area that will never really go away. Vector artboard issues of I'm not that much into 2D. I mean, I do enjoy 2D games, but I would just prefer to make 3D games over 2D games. But that could change with practice and with experience. And also, of course, the downside of vector art on having to do different rotations could be a non-downside because it could just be quick. I mean, it could of course be a downside because, well, you always have to do that. But in practice, it could still be quicker than making the same animations or making the same assets on with like voxel art. That might be a thing, but I don't know yet. So vector art has a little bit more potential to, with time, actually lose all of the downsides that I see in them yet. So that's also why I will invest more time into learning vector art in the next weeks and months, and we'll see where this is going. And that's, I think, enough for this video. I hope you have a nice day.